A Canadian fashion mogul accused of orchestrating a murderous plot against his billionaire neighbor and others. The Deputy Prime Minister allegedly connected to 2 hitmen, and 10 people arraigned in connection with beach access protests. Find out about these stories and others. I'm your host, Nico Scavella, and this is the Tribune's Top 5. A Minnesota man this week accused doctors at the Princess Margaret Hospital of gutting him like a fish to remove his appendix, which he later found out was perfectly healthy, according to international reports. In an interview with American television station Fox 9, Jake Beersdorf said his nightmare began in January when he came to the Bahamas to work at an annual poker tournament. Days later, he said he began to feel excruciating pain in his lower right side and was rushed to the Princess Margaret Hospital. Once there, he said he was made to wait for 14 hours in a filthy room before doctors told him the pain was coming from his appendix. He said doctors gave him anesthesia and operated. However, the Bloomington resident said when he woke up, he found an incision more than a foot long from his breastbone to the top of his groin that ran vertically through the center of his body. Mr. Beersdorf alleged that doctors told him the large incision was needed because his appendix burst and they needed to clean out his insides. He also claimed that doctors gave him about 13 loosely sewn superficial epidermal stitches for an incision he later found out required around 45 staples. He also alleged that he spent 4 days in a disgusting room with about 15 people and his bedding was never changed. Following his hospital stay, Mr. Beersdorf said he spent 5 days in his hotel room and returned to the hospital once more to get discharge papers and have his bandages changed. He also claimed that his Minnesota doctors told him that he had not been properly stitched in the Bahamas and added around 40 staples. Nonetheless, PMH Medical Chief of Staff Dr. James Johnson subsequently denied the claims, charging that Mr. Beersdorf received treatment consistent with international standards and best practice. During a press conference at PMH on Wednesday, Dr. Johnson said he was unable to give specifics on the case as the hospital did not have permission from the patient to release medical information. However, Dr. Johnson confirmed that a man from Minneapolis, Minnesota was treated at PMH on Thursday, January 7th for severe abdomen pain, but refused to reveal the patient's diagnosis, the type of surgery that was performed, or whether or not doctors removed his appendix. However, sources close to the case claim Mr. Beersdorf was diagnosed with acute appendicitis and sections of his appendix showed ulcerated mucosa. Meanwhile, Dr. Johnson said the patient was satisfied during the 5 days he spent at the hospital recovering and added that neither the Public Hospitals Authority nor the Princess Margaret Hospital received any complaints, verbally or written, from the patient or anyone else since the surgery. However, Free National Movement leader Dr. Hubert Minnis, the former Minister of Health, said he was told by his physician counterparts at the hospital that Mr. Beersdorf's appendix was gangrenous and he had pus in his chest cavity. Residents were forced to leave their homes and 2 schools were temporarily closed after a massive fire broke out at the Harold Road landfill late Monday night, the second fire at the dump site in a week. According to Tall Pines MP Leslie Miller, the smoke from the blaze caused some residents in Jubilee Gardens and Victoria Gardens to pack up and leave in the middle of the night. Aquinas College closed early on Tuesday because of the thick smoke in the area, according to officials at the school. The Meridian School also reportedly closed. Renew Bahamas' Chief Commercial Officer Michael Cox said he believes the fires, which spread to over 200 feet, were started intentionally. However, he has no proof. Nonetheless, residents took to social media to express their disgust at the recurring problem. One Jubilee Gardens woman said, and I quote, "Beware, the dump is on fire, thick billowy smoke, it's bad. I had to leave home and stay at my mom's house. I do not know when I will be going back home. I can't even get mad anymore. This is expected," end quote. Another resident said, and I quote, "Woke up to smoke again. Is this ever going to stop? Does someone have to die of smoke inhalation before the government does anything about this? I am so frustrated," end quote. On Thursday, Renew Bahamas officials said the fire had been mostly extinguished. However, the company said efforts are being placed on smoke suppression, adding that a team would work throughout the night. City dump fires have been a recurrent problem for years. Renew Bahamas was engaged by the government in 2014 to manage the landfill and help address the matter. 10 people were arraigned in a magistrate's court on Thursday for their alleged involvement in the destruction of a fence blocking one of the access points to Cabbage Beach last week. All access points to the Nassau and South Streets court complex were blocked off by the heavy presence of police officers for the expected 10 a.m. arraignments of Irvin Moxie, Miguel Joseph, Derek Thompson, Lincoln Bain, Hubert McIntosh, Sam Butler, Trevor Lightbourne, Francis Johnson, Derek Cox, and Jairo Saunders on a charge of damage, disorderly behavior, and 3 counts of obstruction. The 10 accused persons were joined in court by friends, relatives, along with Free National Movement and Democratic National Alliance supporters. In court, lawyers for the accused raised preliminary objections to the trumped-up charges against the group and Moxie, who alone faced 3 counts of assaulting a police officer and resisting arrest. It is claimed that he harmed Chief Superintendent Lamont Delbo, Superintendent Philip Hinsey, and Inspector Lloyd Roll during his attempt to resist lawful arrest during a massive protest last week at Cabbage Beach. All 10 persons were then arraigned on 3 counts each of obstruction and a charge of disorderly behavior, as they allegedly were disturbing the peace and blocking the senior policemen who were acting in their duties. They all refused to plead to the charges, which the chief magistrate recorded as not guilty in accordance with the provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code. Concerning the last charge of damage, where it was alleged that they destroyed a chain-link fence valued at just over $800 on Casino Drive, Moxie pleaded not guilty and the remaining accused refused to enter a plea. The prosecution offered no objection to $1,800 bail for the 10. They returned to magistrate's court on April 20th for a status hearing. Nonetheless, F&M leader Dr. Hubert Minnis, present for the arraignments, suggested that if the F&M wins the next election, the party would expunge the records of the accused men if necessary. Dr. Minnis also questioned why no criminal charges were brought against police officers who were allegedly seen assaulting protesters on videos circulating on social media. DNA leader Branville McCartney, who represents one of the accused, also stressed the importance of citizens having the freedom to protest. Criminals allegedly hired by Canadian fashion mogul Peter Nygard were sent to him by Deputy Prime Minister Philip Brave Davis to protect the billionaire's local interests as a major campaign backer of the Progressive Liberal Party, according to court documents. In covert video recordings purported to be discussions between Mr. Nygard, Livingston Tuggy Bullard, and Whistler Bobo de Vilma, both parties refer extensively to the support of Mr. Davis. Bullard and de Vilma claim that they were told by Mr. Davis to support Mr. Nygard unconditionally as a major sponsor, a premise that Mr. Nygard accepts as he expresses his frustration over his inability to obtain necessary legal permits and a lease to build on government property. Both Bullard and de Vilma, in a sworn affidavit, claimed to have strong ties with Mr. Davis. In their affidavit, both men alleged that they were hired by Mr. Nygard to threaten Director of Physical Planning Michael Major. Bullard and de Vilma claimed they gained access to Mr. Major's office because they had a close relationship with Mr. Davis. The men said they were told that it was Mr. Davis who called Mr. Nygard to tell him that they had threatened the director, which served as confirmation that they had completed the job. According to the affidavit, the men were paid $5,000 each. On the sidelines of an agricultural expo on Thursday, Mr. Davis confirmed to the Tribune that he had known both Bullard and de Vilma since 2010, but said he was unaware of the allegations. He said, and I quote, "I know the individuals identified in the story, and I have known them from at least 2010 or thereabouts. It depends on what you define as close relations," end quote. Meanwhile, court documents reveal that Prime Minister Perry Christie allegedly promised Mr. Nygard that he would issue him a lease to build on government property, according to court documents. Mr. Nygard is purportedly shown expressing frustration over Mr. Christie's failure to make good on his assurances in a covert video recording included in court documents as the findings of an investigation paid for by Save the Bays. In a video recording on May 10, 2015 between Mr. Nygard, Bullard, and de Vilma, the fashion mogul lambasted Mr. Christie for making fake promises over the issuance of a lease for which he had received authorization nearly 25 years ago. In another meeting with the men on May 12th, Mr. Nygard said he was close to leaving the country because he felt the Prime Minister was wasting his time, adding that he had, and I quote, "pissed away $5 million since the Prime Minister got him involved." The court documents also reveal surprising details concerning the close relationship between Mr. Nygard and the governing Progressive Liberal Party, with the fashion mogul repeatedly referring to his considerable influence over top government officials, and the two criminals, Bullard and de Vilma, referring to conversations they have had with the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. Canadian fashion mogul Peter Nygard has been accused of orchestrating a murderous plot against his billionaire neighbor Louis Bacon and lawyer Fred Smith because of an ongoing campaign against development at Nygard Quay. Affidavits detail a year-long investigation into claims that Mr. Nygard contracted two criminals to harass, intimidate, and cause physical harm and property damage to four directors of the Save the Bays organization, Reverend C.B. Moss, a government official, and several others. Save the Bay's directors Joseph Darville, Rommel Ferreira, Mrs. Smith, and Mr. Bacon, along with Reverend Moss, have filed a writ in the Supreme Court against Mr. Nygaard and lawyer Code Smith. They allege that the defendants orchestrated a 2.5-year campaign of fear and violence to kill or scare off activists he saw as opponents to development plans for his Lightfoot Key property. They are seeking damages and a permanent injunction against Mr. Nygaard and Code Smith, restraining them from arranging any further tactics against them. The 400 pages of documents and 19 videos detail the findings of a team of retired FBI and Scotland Yard professionals and Bahamian investigators who investigated the claims of criminals Livingston Tuggy Bullard and Whistler Bobo de Vilma. Bullard and de Vilma identified themselves as high-profile gang members in court documents and alleged that Mr. Nygaard gave them a hit list of people to murder or send a message to, with Mr. Smith and Mr. Bacon topping the list as the worst of all. Others on the list included lawyer Pericles Malis and Tribune business editor Neil Hartnell. The criminals were tracked down with the help of Free National Movement Senator Michael Pintard and former Senator John Bostwick, who alerted Mr. Smith that the men were behind the protests against Save the Bays. The two men reportedly cooperated with the investigation in return for compensation for their actions as whistleblowers and to ensure the protection of themselves and their families. During the course of the investigation, investigators covertly recorded video and audio of 5 separate meetings between Bullard, de Vilma, and Mr. Nygaard that are purported to have taken place in a car. The men were purported to have discussed acts of violence. The criminals also detailed their surveillance of Fred Smith, whom they claim is still under threat. The men alleged they were paid almost $400,000 to stage to stage 4 separate protests or hate rallies against Save the Bays, namely Mr. Bacon and Mr. Smith, at Rawson Square in July 2014, the organization's event in December 2014, the 2015 New Year's Day Junk New Parade, and at a Supreme Court hearing in June 2015. The criminals also alleged they were paid $5,000 to threaten and rough up Director of Physical Planning Michael Major over his refusal to grant Mr. Nygaard the permits he needed for developments at his Lightfoot Key property. According to the writ, Bullard and de Vilma take credit for the firebombing of Reverend Moss's car in 2013, a job they said was contracted by Mr. Nygaard for $10,000 each. The pair also claimed they received $10,000 to burn down a Wolf Road business owned by an alleged ex-girlfriend of Mr. Nygaard in 2014. The suit is the latest in a long-standing legal battle over alleged unauthorized dredging and related development at Nygaard Key launched against Mr. Nygaard by Mr. Bacon and the Save the Bays organization. According to the court documents, the plaintiffs compensated Bullard and de Vilma for being whistleblowers and exposing Mr. Nygaard's alleged criminal activities. Since the threat surfaced, the plaintiffs said they have taken significant precautionary measures, including employing bodyguards on a 24-hour basis and installing sophisticated perimeter protective systems. According to Bullard, as recently as January, Mr. Nygaard remained determined that Mr. Bacon be killed and promised to compensate Bullard and de Vilma with whatever they wished when the job was done, at one point offering to build a house each. According to Bullard, as recently as January, Mr. Nygaard remained determined that Mr. Bacon be killed and promised to compensate Bullard and de Vilma with whatever they wished when the job was done, at one point offering to build a house each. Want to get in on the discussion? Well, here's how you can. Just log on to our website, www.tribune242.com, like us on Facebook, Tribune News Network, subscribe to our YouTube page, Tribune242, or send us a tweet at Tribune242.